So we have four great panelists for this really, really important discussion, but let me briefly introduce. First of all, we have His Excellency Khalid Hamadan, Chief Executive for the Bahrain Economic Development Board. Welcome, Khalid.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce Pankaj Astana, Vice President, Digital Payments and Labs at MasterCard. Thank you for joining us, Pankaj. Next, I'd like to introduce Abdul Rahman Al-Thahaiban, Managing Director, Meta Google Cloud at Google. And last but not least, up the end, Marketa Simkova, Head of People and Change at KPMG. Fantastic panel. Thank you so much for joining us, and really, really important conversation here, because as much as I love talking about the digital trend, the data that we all have, this is about an ecosystem. We started to touch on it with Christy a little bit half an hour ago or an hour ago, but maybe I can start with you, Khalid. Mm-hmm. When you think about an ecosystem, a 360-degree approach, getting this ecosystem right, what do you think about, Khalid, when you think about this broad ecosystem?
First of all, good morning to everybody.
Is this one on?
Is it? Can you hear me? I need a handheld mic, maybe.
Yeah, we might go from mic as well,
yeah.
Khalid.
Sure.
Here we go. Getting the ecosystem right is really, really important. Khalid.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to start off by congratulating the United Arab Emirates for hosting Expo. I've had a little bit of time this morning to walk around. It's very, very impressive, and I look forward to being able to explore everything that they have to offer here. It's the first time that our region is showcasing ourselves to the world. I'd like to also thank our partners, The Economist, for this event, and I'd like to thank everybody who has attended today. When we think of the ecosystem, when we think of the 360 for human capital when it comes to the digital world, I want to take a step back and think of at a country level. There's probably three players, three elements that need to come together. It is the private sector, the public sector, and the individual. The roles are clear. It's the private sector is the entrepreneur, it's the innovator, it's the capital, it's the idea. It can only work if the public sector does its job, which is number one, to attract, number two, to facilitate, to enable, and to regulate. To regulate to make sure that the better good is considered. And then we end up with talking about the individual, which is probably the biggest component when it comes to human capital. They're the ones who are going to execute the vision. They're going to implement it. And it could only happen in the digital world. The world is changing very, very fast. The only way the individual can perform and maintain the productivity level is to continue to skill, reskill, to learn, relearn, upskill. And it's an ongoing process. The day any of the individuals or us, if we stop learning, if we stop developing, our skill set will become obsolete in a very short period of time. And it's a new mindset that we have to constantly work on this. And everybody has to be, the private sector, public sector, the individual, we all have to be agile, and it all works together.
Right, absolutely. That upskilling and reskilling, obviously we're going to touch on that a fair bit, but it's a pretty important challenge, right? I mean, just when I grew up in Australia, it was primary school, high school, maybe university or vocational training, and that was it. I don't think we can sort of have that system anymore.
It looks like that world is over.
Yeah.
It is constant, and it's the institution's responsibility to train the staff. It is the individual's responsibility to self-train themselves, and it is the responsibility of the government, of the public sector, to make sure that there is the funding, the ecosystem in place that will enable that, the right institutions, the right type of incentives to make sure that this is an ongoing process. Yeah. And it's unlikely that we will be, at any point in time, have enough skill set that we will be able to cope with the very fast pace of change.
Yeah. It's a fascinating point, Khalid. We can't stop. There's no end point where we just stop training and stop skilling. Yeah. And so unfortunately for me, I may need to go back to school or high school or university, but it's a really important point. Pankaj, bringing you in, the ecosystem, the 360-degree approach, we've just heard a great introduction from Khalid, but from your perspective, what do you think about when you think about the ecosystem, this 360-degree approach?
Yeah, I think you've made a great start, and I'll just sort of extend it to the corporate and the individual. So I think for the corporate, it really comes down to two things. It comes down to culture and structure. And that is sort of going to accelerate a lot of this continuous learning process. So let me explain what I mean. When we talk about culture, because things are dynamic, I think it's very important to be driven by first principles. It's not about what you do, but it's, I think, good to lead your organization with first principle values, which are core values that makes it easy for people to rally around. Let me give you an instance of MasterCard. So at MasterCard, our guiding vision is to do well by doing good.
Right.
And what that does is it gives a very big canvas for people to chart their path. It unleashes creativity. And what MasterCard did was then it took it one step further and said, how will I reach the next 1 billion users who do not have access to payments? And that sort of opened the door to do something even further. The last thing that they've sort of come around was something called as the decency quotient. So, and all organizations are doing it. So, so I think that's very important. When you start decency.
About being decent.
Being decent.
Right.
And what that does is it unleashes creativity. It unleashes an urge to succeed, but it does it in a way where people are mindful of each other. They are mindful of the circumstances. And that sort of comes to another very important point, and that is structure. That to succeed, organizations need to create structures that can help talent unleash themselves and to really be ready for the digital future, because digital is uncertain. We heard some panelists talk about that before. So we've got to be dynamic and we've got to be ready. And that's where structures play a role. Because if you don't complement a good culture with good structure, you're probably going to have, if I may use the word, maybe a cowboy culture where people are just doing things randomly. So the structure creates the safety net, and it gives the guidance to the people on how they might do it so that they don't take unnecessary risks. So structures help take calculated risks. And that's very important. So we've just launched a marketplace where people, employees who have great talent can actually go and broadcast their idea.
Internally.
And start collaborating with others. And
so this is not like singing talents. I have singing talents and dancing talents, but this is not, I wouldn't promote those.
We're not there yet. So we're not MasterCard for singing yet, but
yep.
I guess, the thing is that people are getting a reason to collaborate.
Yep.
And what the organization is doing is it is making available talent like legal, HR, operations to help them think the ideas through in a safety net. And this is just one instance. Organizations are replete with such examples. And I think every corporate here needs to think about these two dimensions of how are they building foundational culture through first principles, and secondly, how are they bringing structure to help that process.
Can I ask you a bit, just follow up on that one. We heard, 2 hours ago now with Marcus, and I didn't have much time to probe him on it, but he was talking about, I think it was Apple, no wall chart. It sounds very Apple. But then you talk about structures. I mean, how do companies, organisations, private or public, find the balance between structures that, I don't know, give us guidance, give us guide rails maybe, but allow that no wall chart culture that Marcus was talking about 2 hours ago, that probably fosters creativity. So how do companies find that balance between structure, allowing their people to have the guide rails, but also be creative?
Yeah, so I do believe structures are important, especially when you start heading into execution. People need to know who's going to do what and who do they need to lean on.
Right.
So to that extent, I do believe that structures are important. But we've got to manage this balance of cultivating creativity, which should be boundaryless.
Yeah.
And managing flawless execution, which is going to work like a sports team. So it's a bit of a combination of both, and I think all organizations need to find that happy balance for themselves.
It's fascinating. Again, I just think this is just, there's not an end point. This is almost cultural, as we just said a second ago with Khalid, that you don't get to an end point and stop and go, I'm done now. Digitalisation is done. So it's fascinating. There's a cultural thing here about finding that balance and embedding that in the culture. So it's just a constant stream of learning and adapting. Abdul Rahman, can I bring you in? I'd love to hear your perspective about the ecosystem. How do you think about this 360-degree approach to the ecosystem from your perspective?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's good pleasure to be with the panelists. I'm sure there will be lots of learning points here. I think many of the organizations have been in the midst of the digitally transforming into their own businesses. However, the pandemic itself has accelerated the process of moving to digital transformation. For you to address the digital transformation, you need to ensure the proper ecosystem that has high dependency of three main components: infrastructure, product, and people. And I think people as a human capital is key element. And I will comment later on the topic that was mentioned about the culture itself and the integration with the structure. But looking into all that aspect, I think that itself creates a huge demand and need to develop talent to address digital transformation. In the case of many of the organizations, or in the case of Google itself, we already have been committed to accelerate the skill set of talents and committed to train almost 40 million talents rather than consultants in order for them to be ready, because we believe that there was a recent, can you hear me?
Yep.
There was a recent report, I think it was issued by ACG, indicated that 90% of the leaders are already committed to go to digital transformation. However, 80% of those 90% are concerned or worried about the talent to address that. And that will go back to the point of how adoption to the cloud is going to take place. And that goes back to the point of culture. If you don't have that mindset, because the digital transformation completely changed the way we do business and the way we live and the way many things have been implicated. Whatever that made you successful 2 years ago, for sure not going to do, if you maintain the same strategy, no, for sure you'll not be able to maintain the same success you will do. So I think that element of human capital is a key area of focus, I believe, organizations need to address.
Abdul Rahman, can I just follow up there? I mean, I'm an economist, and what I love about this transformation, this transition is seeing the progress. I think about GDP, I think about jobs. But just when we think about jobs and human capital, what fascinates me as an economist is how do we work with our teams and our staff in a way that technology augments their skills, benefits me and makes me a better worker, a more efficient worker for my company or organisation, versus replaces my skills. So you're sitting in a company that knows this stuff really well. Your own training programs, how you're developing your human capital, how do you find that balance between helping a worker, looking at that person right now and saying, I can see where technology is going, I can see your skills, I need to, tailor your training program in a way where technology is augmenting your skills.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point, and I think many of people would be concerned about the change of AI, machine learning would have an impact on the human capital, which is not true at all, because we still see an accelerating of human capital being engaged in that industry because of the data management and because of many aspects associated with that.
Using this technology, companies are actually able to foresee what jobs they will have in the future, what tasks will be digitized, and perhaps what jobs will disappear, and also what new jobs will appear, and accordingly what new skills they will need in the next 5-10 years. So this is actually really helpful, because then they are able to look at the current population and see what skills do they have, and what is the gap between what we will need 3 years down the line and what we have now. And then really kind of the options that they have are 4 ways. We call it build, buy, borrow, bot. So build means that you actually take the talent that you have within the organization and you start reskilling on the skills that appear to be the ones that you'll need in the future. Buy, you need to basically attract from the market, you need to hire the new talent, and for that you really need to develop an appealing value proposition. Borrow, meaning that you will get gig workers or subcontractors for a certain period of time only. And bot, of course, that you will digitize that particular task.
Fascinating. I should have written that down, but hopefully everyone else took notes. Thank you, Marketa. Carly, can I bring you back in?
Yes, sir.
How can? We've talked about the issues here, the themes, the ideas, but how can organisations execute this 360-degree approach, Khalid?
I think the easiest way to illustrate it is with an example.
Yep.
A success story that we recently had in Bahrain is a few weeks ago, Citibank has announced that they intend to hire 1,000 coders that are Bahraini. And it started off with a realization at the city group level that over the next few years, they have X number, 10,000, 20,000 number of coders that they will need to hire globally. That skill set, that talent pool is not available in a single location. And they will have to go across the world in order to hire that. And they started by posting job openings all over the world, and they used to get applicants, and they gave them a series of tests. And they picked, one of the places that they picked was Bahrain, 1,000 coders. This is the initial target. It could be scaled up, and they liked them. They liked the Bahrainis that they tested and interviewed for 3 reasons. Number 1 is the quality. Number 2 is diversity, and number 3 is retention prospects. Quality, when tested, their coding abilities, they scored at the top compared to other cities and other talent pools, which is very, very good. We spent quite a bit of time making sure that our education institutions are able to produce the quality that will be desired by the market. Another thing is diversity. What they realized that's unique about Bahrain is that the portion of female computer science students is higher than in other parts of the world. And Citibank, being a very smart and good run institution, they realize that if they hire from Bahrain, they're able to address their diversity targets globally. And the third thing is they have experience. They've been working for decades in Bahrain, and they know the level of retention in the staff in Bahrain, and they compared it to the turnover rates in other places, and they realized high turnover costs money. Hiring from Bahrain is likely to be a lot more productive and makes a lot of sense for them business-wise. And for those reasons, we engaged with them. Obviously, we did our bit as well. We facilitated and made sure and encouraged the Citibank to do this, and worked out very, very well. This is one of the successes that could be replicated. Banking is not the only industry that requires coders, and coders is one talent or one skill set that is required. There's multiple skill sets that are required, and if we could do this with a bank coding, it can be done in other sectors with other skill sets.
What I find, again, fascinating about this is that the term economists use is called telemigration, which is just the ability to actually get staff or get someone to do a certain task anywhere in the world. So I find, that's a fascinating example, and I find it's going to become more competitive.
Absolutely. It is an opportunity and a threat. It's very, very good for us. We have Bahrainis in Bahrain providing services to the world digitally. And it is for the Fortune 100 companies. That wouldn't have been possible 2 decades ago or possibly a decade ago. It's becoming the norm. But it's the same thing that a business in Bahrain, instead of hiring locally, can deploy and can utilize a skill set based elsewhere. So we think this is something that would work in our advantage, but it can't be to the advantage of everybody.
Oh no, I think it's going to be competitive, but again, with the disruption coming, with the transition coming, I can see this happening a lot more, maybe for Bahrain, but also other countries as well. This is not the end of that story, and I think it's a really interesting and a great case study. Thank you, Khalid. Pankaj, can I bring you back in from MasterCard? So you spoke earlier about some really interesting initiatives internally, sharing talents and structures versus creativity. But just, can you go a bit deeper on your perspective about how organisations can execute this 360-degree approach?
So I think the first thing is definitely being informed, and that itself is becoming very difficult nowadays, right, with so much of information overload. So one part would be to create better mechanisms for internal education, and I think people learn best when they do things. So I think learning through doing is great. And Marketa mentioned about something called borrowing talent, which really sort of sounds very appealing. How can we sort of learn not only by doing internally in our groups, but also collaborating with other entities, on secondments or deputation, work on projects together. I think one part of making sure that talent is ready for this digital future is to create avenues for this kind of collaboration, not restricted only to internal, but also external. And yeah, I would say that that in itself could be a very big catalyst to get talent to do more. The other example that I shared was, if you look at the high concentration of talent on the global map, there is a very strong correlation with the availability of high talent with the availability of a very vibrant fintech or a technology ecosystem of startups.
Right, so it goes together.
Exactly, and I think, again, if I were to sort of say Bahrain's vision and even what UAE's done is something which is very inspiring in that way, that, you know, that sounds like the right journey. It's not very hard to find great talent on the West Coast in the US, but there's a very strong correlation of the companies that are succeeding and actually leading the way, and the availability of talent. And this talent is actually starting their own fintech startups. So it's always a little concerning for the organization that, you know, will I lose my talent if I encourage too much of, you know. But I think it's a chance worth taking, because you will probably end up seeing a few people go, and again, to His Excellency's point, we're all learners for life. So that means organizations are now educational institutions too. We're alumni when we leave our old companies, and you'd like them to be great brand ambassadors.
Yeah.
And yes, some will go, but a lot more will stay back.
Yep.
And I think it's a balance worth pursuing.
Maybe I'm being too optimistic here, but I'd like to think that the organisations, private or public, that invest in people, invest in their sort of talent and learning programs. Yes, some people might develop to the point where they leave, and you might lose some, as you just mentioned, but I'd like to think that people who buy into that, who see they're being invested in as a person, I would like to think that they maybe hang around a lot longer. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to train and develop and support your staff, because they should buy in. They should buy into that process.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Please, after Robin, jump in.
Can you hear me? I want to comment on what...
Oh, there's a microphone there. Try that one there.
I want to comment on what Khalid has mentioned in the beginning about what they're doing in Bahrain, creating job opportunity for almost 1,000. I think looking into the Gulf, if I become maybe a bit micro-focused, I believe the Gulf, again, the diversity of the economy has been clearly changing. And I think now the focus is towards digital transformation and digital economy. That's why in every vision of each of the countries are putting more focus on the digital economy and how much that would contribute to GDP. I think these are the right channel to help organization or countries specifically to develop that ecosystem. It's happening in Bahrain, now it's happening in Saudi with the expectation of almost training one developer per 100 compared to the citizens. And that itself, I think, will create that economy. If you go into the history of the past, that's exactly what has happened in Egypt, what happened in India, to move to diversity specifically on anything related to digital economy. So looking into that cannot happen unless there is a proper ecosystems in terms of talent development, training, education, moving from the traditional training towards something related to startups. All of the corporate companies, they need to give that investment. And we've seen this. We've seen this again from Google perspective, from other corporate organizations, putting more investment in the startup, because these are the ones that can drive business. I mean, who would ever believe a company like Uber would be probably the largest taxi car while they don't own a single taxi? And that's something, or Alibaba, or if you mention again Amazon or the rest of the players. When you look into all that aspect, I think that will drill down to developing an ecosystem that has high dependency on startups. I think that's the new era. Those are the things that will change the world in terms of economy, in terms of growth.
Abdurrahman, let's stay with you for a second. I wanted to ask you specifically about the Middle East and just the skills deficiencies or the skills gaps. How should we think about that from a Middle East perspective? What initiatives, training, areas in sort of the skills gaps needed for this digital transition? What should we be focusing on there for the Middle East?
I think the Middle East has moved into lots of evolution of talent development. In the past, if you find any fresh graduates, the top priority would be to work in the government or to work with one large organization. Now, the coin has been flipped. And I think that the talent in the Middle East are looking into opportunity because of the broader view they have, because of the huge opportunity that corporate provides to them. Like now, every single corporate organization operate in the region. And we started to see people from the region operating externally, like the case was just mentioned in Citibank, I'm sure MasterCard, Google, and other companies. So I think the decision that many of the organizations did, I wouldn't call it liberalizing the education, but in the past there used to be high dependency on the traditional universities. In the last maybe 10, 15 years, this has been changed, and many people are more focused on soft skills development and issues related to developing an entrepreneur training in order to get them into the next era. Now you find top talents, and specifically when you look at it from the Middle East, or if I take a country like Saudi, more than 50% or 60% of the population lesser than 30 years old. And those themselves, that's giving an indication that IT would be the way forward. Same thing in Bahrain with the literacy of female community in the computer science universities. So when you look into all of that, I think the future looks much brighter for the talents in the Middle East. I think the opportunity that has been created by the government and the enterprises are really attractive and an opportunity that cannot be missed, and I don't think it would be missed considering the challenges faced to move from the economy diversity from oil to data to be the new oil of the industry or the region.
Yeah, thank you so much, Abdul Rahman. I just want to follow up on that point, at the soft skills side of things, or maybe we should call them human skills, right? So obviously we need coders. We had a great example here about what's happened recently with Bahrain and City, but when I think about technology and I think about that augmentation of, I do think there's a role for interpersonal skills, creativity. I mean, I'm not very good at these things, right? But I think these skills are going to be, we sort of forget them. But am I wrong? Are they soft skills, human skills, necessary to complement the sort of harder technical skills?
Absolutely. It goes without saying. I think the soft skills is really critical element. If you find a guru in technology while he or she cannot express what they're doing, that goes back to soft skills. And that's something I believe that has been undermined in the region. But in the last maybe 15, 20 years ago, this has been paid attention to. And that's why when you compare the education here to the West 3 decades before, you would see that all driven by the communication skills, presentation skills. These are the type of thing that would really help people to get a faster and better job and an opportunity for them even to do more innovation, more activity.
Absolutely. Marketa, can I bring you back in? On the same point, you spoke brilliantly a few minutes ago, but from a Middle East perspective, soft skills, technical skills, what are sort of skills gaps or skills areas that you think we should be focusing on here in the Middle East?
So actually what we are seeing from our research that what companies need now the most is technology for non-technology people. So what happens quite often that they have very good talent within the IT department, but then it goes beyond that, right? You need to have data analysts within the finance. You need to have data analytics within the HR department, everywhere within the core business as well. So really making sure that the technology goes just beyond the IT department. So that's the first concern. Secondly, it's really kind of developing the digital mindset. So really always think digital. Whatever task you can do that can be automated, don't do it manually. Think how you can improve things around you. So again, developing this digital mindset. Next, also developing digital leadership. So actually really having leaders within the organization that will be able to carry out this digital transformation. It's also very important.
Absolutely. Khalid, I'd love to bring you back in just from your very unique perspective there in Bahrain, but the skills gaps or the skills areas that you think we should be focusing on the next 5 or 10 years to help us make sure that we get all these benefits of this great digital technology. What are you focusing on?
For us, this is something that we spend a considerable amount of time thinking is how do we expand the pool of talent where City and the like are able to hire from.
Yep.
And we think a success like City will inspire as soon as young people realize that I can graduate from college and I can take this course and I will probably earn X. But if I end up working for Citibank or being eligible to apply for a Citibank job and I am chosen, I can earn 3x, the chances are it will inspire a generation of coders who wouldn't have, but
Right.
it's the feedback loop.
Yeah.
And this is what we've seen in the past. Banks came to Bahrain before we had Bahraini bankers.
Yep.
But it didn't take long for it just to work without ratios, without anything. Today, 18% of our GDP is financial services. 70% of the people that work in financial services in Bahrain are Bahrainis, and it's without any quotas. There's no localization ratio. Every bank is free to hire any nationality they want in Bahrain. They hire Bahrainis because, number one, Bahrainis realized it makes a lot of sense to study the skill set that will make you eligible to work in a bank. And number two, we as a government made sure that we have the right institutions, the right type of incentives to encourage that.
Absolutely. We've got about 5 minutes left before our coffee break. I cannot wait for another coffee here. Any questions from the audience, submit them online and we'll take them. And I'll get to as many as I can in the last 5 minutes. But we have a question here. I'm not sure who the best person to ask is, but it's about the issue of data localization, localization of talent, whether that's, I don't know who could take this question, but whether that localization question is about data localization or human talent and localization. Anyone want to put their hand up for how should we find that balance between domestic preferences and sort of openness to talent and data? I don't know who wants to take that question.
I can take
Abdul Rahman, please.
I'll take the data and someone else can take the human.
Yeah, but if you can talk about the human capital side, there's a microphone there.
I think what's meant to be by data localization.
Try that microphone now, Abdul Rahman.
I think what's meant to be by data localization is data sovereignty. And we know we are in a very regulated market in the region here, and they need to have like data centers that are hyperscaler type of work in order to get that issues. And it's good to see the traction from the hyperscaler and the large again cloud provider to have that issues. Specifically, the increase of data in the region is quite significant. If you look at probably among the top or the largest user of Twitter are within the region, to Saudi, UAE, and Egypt. Similarly, Facebook. Similarly, again, Google search and the rest. But I think the need of data to be resides in the regions becomes critical. Becomes no other option, even though there are short-term plan. And I think every single country within the region are addressing that. From Google Cloud perspective, we took this under consideration quite thoughtfully, and we have already committed an investment in Qatar, Saudi, and potentially in other two countries in the Gulf to address that element. And I believe that would be a game changer for the digital economy in the region. And because of the adoption of cloud, I think that will be critically important issues related to data localization.
Absolutely. Kelly, maybe we can bring you, because you mentioned a very interesting point a second ago in your previous answer about you can hire any nationality from anywhere, but how do you find that balance?
When we think of localization, we want open borders. We want to be able to compete with everybody. We think we will do well in that world. And the same thing with the localization rules when it comes to data. We don't believe in that. We're the first country in the world to pass data jurisdiction law. Any data hosted in Bahrain is under the sovereignty of the host, of the home country, not the host country. We believe in that. That's an environment that we are trying to encourage, because that's an environment that we think we will do very, very well. We think free market, open competition, fair competition is something good for everybody. And it will elevate all of us to aspire to compete for that. And in the end, all of us will benefit from it.
Absolutely. I think that's actually a fascinating point and a great place to end. But let's please join me in thanking our fantastic panel, Khalid, Pankaj, Abdul Rahman, and Marketa. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Coffee break, fantastic. How good is that? Can we please have 20 minutes for coffee break? Come back in at 20 past midday. But thank you so much for your attention this morning. It's been great discussing with you all. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.